Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the pre-application webinar for OSSE's high-impact tutoring grants for tutoring programming, strategic program supports, and program evaluation services. We're going to start in just a few minutes, so we'll give everyone a couple more minutes to join. So just hold tight for a little bit longer. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the pre-application webinar for OSSE's high-impact tutoring grants. High-impact tutoring grants for tutoring programming, strategic program supports, and program evaluation services. My name is Charlotte Nugent, and I'm the high-impact tutoring program manager here at OSSE, and I'll be your MC today. Can a few people just confirm in the question box that you can see the slides and also hear me? Unfortunately, you're not able to use the chat, but you can use the question section. Someone could just type yes to confirm that you can see the slides and you can hear me. Good, okay, I'm seeing some yeses come through, yes for slides and audio, okay. Thank you, everyone, I really appreciate that. I do not want to spend an hour talking to myself. We're gonna jump right in because we have quite a bit of information to cover. On Tuesday, we managed to cover it in about 50 minutes and then have 10 minutes or so for questions at the end. And I might be able to stay a little over the hour to answer questions too. So we are going to try to zoom as quickly as possible. By the end of this webinar, attendees will understand the purpose and requirements of the high impact tutoring grant, including the purpose of the funds, eligibility and program requirements, priority areas, and key competition details and deadlines. You'll be familiar with the application components and review process, and also how to access our EEMS application and who to contact with issues and questions for that application. Excuse me, I have a second monitor, move a little closer. Before I dive right into the content, just some housekeeping before we go forward. Please keep yourselves muted throughout. I think most people know this by this point in our virtual working lifestyle. You do have the ability to unmute yourself when we get to the questions at the end, but just remain muted until we get to that portion. Because we have so much info to cover, and some of your questions might be answered by the presentation, we're going to save verbal questions for the end, but you may ask written questions in the question box as we go. We will also kind of go backwards through those at the end, the written questions in the question box. If we don't get to all of the questions in the call, we will put them in our FAQ documents as well. When we get to this point, I'll remind you, but to ask a question aloud at the end, there's a little hand that you can click to raise your hand. So just click that and I'll be able to see whose hand is raised and call on you when we get to that portion. And this webinar is also being recorded and we'll post it afterward on the website. We've actually already posted the webinar from Tuesday. So if you lose connection or have to drop off, you'll be able to see the rest of the webinar once we post it. And again, there's so much information. I'm going to be talking very fast, so I apologize in advance. I hope it's still clear. And please feel free to ask questions if there's anything that you don't understand. Hold on just one moment. I'm just making sure. Okay. Okay, so onward we go. What is the purpose of the funds for the HIT grant? So the HIT grant will provide supports to organizations with a demonstrated history of success providing tutoring programming to deliver high quality HIT programs designed to mitigate the effects of interrupted instruction that students have experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we will also be looking for applications from organizations with expertise in providing strategic program supports for HIT organizations, as well as program evaluation services for HIT programming. So there's actually 4 different award types that we are seeking applications for in this grant competition. This first slide talks about the 2 actual tutoring grant types, which I think many people on the call are interested in. And one we're calling a scaling grant and one we're calling a planning and launch grant. So for the scaling grants, we are looking for applicants with a demonstrated history of success providing tutoring programming. It's 3 years, which we'll expand on a little more in subsequent slides, who are planning to offer evidence-based HIT programming directly to district students at 3 or more school or non-school sites and to at least 150 students initially. For purposes of this RFA, scaling means expanding an existing district tutoring program with evidence of success to more students. So this is for organizations who are already tutoring students in the district and you want to use these funds to grow your program larger. The planning and the launch grants are for applicants also with a demonstrated history of success in tutoring who wish to begin offering HIT in the district for the first time and need funding to set up operations, or who wish to develop and launch new programming not previously offered, new tutoring programming specifically, not previously offered by the organization. So for example, maybe you've been successfully offering elementary school tutoring and now you want to start middle school. You could apply for a planning and launch grant for that as well. I think in many cases, based on many of the questions I'm getting, I think this will apply to a lot of organizations who are coming into the district for the first time. Maybe you've been doing tutoring elsewhere, but you have not yet worked with district students and you want to set up programming here. That would be the grant for you. The other 2 award types are the strategic program support and program evaluation services. So the first one, strategic program support, this is for applicants with demonstrated expertise in providing strategic supports to organizations and or schools operating HIT programs, including all of these 5 areas. So we're going to be looking for all 5 of these things. Intensive training and professional development on setting up and or strengthening HIT programs, supports for recruiting and training tutors, supports for new tutoring organizations or organizations launching new tutoring programming, supports for non-school sites to run effective HIT, and creation of high quality materials for organizations to use to implement tutoring. And then finally, the program evaluation services, we're looking for applicants with demonstrated expertise conducting experimental and or quasi-experimental program evaluations of HIT initiatives who will conduct a multi-year program evaluation of the effectiveness of HIT in the district. So what is high impact tutoring? We wanted to make sure we had a slide about this. And this information comes from our high impact tutoring guidance document that you can find a link to it on our grant RFA website. And then a lot of this information is covered in the RFA as well. But we just really want to stress that the programs that we are looking to fund should align to all of the things on this slide. So all the things that where the column says high impact tutoring is, we will be looking for the program to check all of those boxes. And we will be looking for it to not be in the column where it is not. So let me walk through what it is and what it is not. I'm going to go back and forth, left to right across the screen. So high impact tutoring is accessible to all students in a school. It is not remedial for struggling students only or treated like a punishment. It is, I'm in the second row, intensive and at least 2 times per week. It's up to a 3-to-1 student-tutor ratio, so 3 students for every tutor. It occurs a minimum of 90 minutes per week, or this detail is also in RFA, or a minimum of 60 minutes for kindergartners or first graders. High impact tutoring is not low dosage or irregular. We are not looking for it to occur 1 time per week or less. And we are not looking for a student tutor ratio that's higher than 3-to-1. So no 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 or any larger size groups of students per tutor. The third row, high impact tutoring is provided by a qualified tutor who is trained in the tutoring program and role. It is not provided by an unvetted or untrained tutor. It is individualized. It's driven by diagnostic and formative assessment data, and it's aligned to the student's current skill levels while also connecting to what is currently being taught in the student's classroom. It is not decontextualized, sitting in front of a computer program only, focused on discrete skills or about filling out worksheets. And then final row, high impact tutoring is responsive. It involves a positive mentoring relationship between the student and the tutor. It is assets oriented and it values students' diverse strengths and needs. It's committed to high expectations, and it is in addition to or on top of core content area instruction and students' other required services, such as English language supports they might be getting or any accommodations from their IEP. It is not a replacement for any of those things. It is not a substitute for any other interventions that the student qualifies for. It is not in place of content area classroom instruction, so students should not be being pulled out of their general class instruction to receive high impact tutoring. And it's not a cause for a student to miss content area classes. Okay, good. I see some questions coming in. That's very good. Keep the questions coming as we go. And like I said, we will strive to answer those at the end. So funds available, excuse me, and the funding period. Okay, this table is in the RFA, but we just wanted to go over it again here. We anticipate making between 12 to 17 awards across all 4 award types, and you can see the expected number of awards for each one in the table. Be really clear about this. I've gotten a couple of questions about this. Organizations may apply for only 1 award unless you're applying for a scaling grant and a planning and launch grant for different types of programming. So for example, you cannot apply for both a scaling grant and a strategic program supports. You can't apply for a strategic program supports and program evaluation. The only situation in which you could apply for 2 of these awards is for a scaling and a planning and launch grant. And it has to be for the planning and launch, you need to be launching something different from what it is that you're already doing. So just to make that clear. I think you can see the award types. We went over those. You can see the maximum and minimum requests for each kind. And then I just wanted to note here the grant period. So for 3 of the 4 award types, this is a multi-year award. We will be awarding funding up front through this multi-year period through September 30th, 2024. So it's approximately a 28-month period. The planning and launch grants, however, are just a 1-year award. So we would be making this award, again, that we're aiming for mid-May, and it would be through May 2023. So those planning and launch grants are just for a year. And the goal would be that the planning and launch grantees at that year's time would then be eligible to apply for a future cohort of this award for the scaling grant. So we hope to make available future funding opportunities for those planning and launch grantees to continue to grow their programming. Questions? Okay, good. I see questions. Please keep the questions coming in. Eligibility. Okay, I have one slide here that's very high level about eligibility, and I have some more detailed slides toward the end that are closer to the question section because by far I'm getting the most questions about eligibility. So I want to make sure your questions about that are answered. But just really high level, eligible applicants include nonprofit organizations and for-profit businesses. However, preference will be given to nonprofit applicants. Local education agencies or LEAs, essentially schools, are ineligible to apply for this grant competition. In a future grant competition, a future cohort of this grant, eligibility may be expanded to LEAs, but they are not eligible for this grant competition. Okay, the third bullet here is extremely important. And if you have some key takeaways from this webinar, I really want everyone to walk away with this one. This bullet outlines 3 requirements that you absolutely must have to receive funding as a grantee in the District of Columbia. And we at OSSE do not control these 3 elements. And we are unfortunately not able to provide much help to you to obtain these elements or make these processes go faster. So I'm going to read through what these are, and I just strongly encourage you to start working on these right away. So one is you must be incorporated and registered to operate in the District of Columbia with the district's Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, or DCRA is the agency acronym. So you have to reach out to them and register to operate. If you haven't already done that, there's a link in the RFA for the website, for their website, where you can go do that. Once you are registered with them, you need to get from them a certificate of good standing from DCRA. So you need to actually proactively ask them for that, and they need to provide you the certificate of good standing, and you're going to need to provide it to us. And again, it's a process for them to be able to do that, and they they have many organizations asking them for this, so you want to make sure you get yourself in the queue ASAP. And then number 3, you need to be able to produce a certificate of clean hands from the district's Office of Tax and Revenue, or OTR. And again, you need to proactively reach out to them and request the certificate. It says you don't owe money to the DC government. All these 3 things, you have to have them if we're going to give you money, and they can take a while. So I would literally encourage everyone to do this tomorrow if you're considering applying for this grant, to reach out and start these 3 processes to make sure that you have them in time. If you are experiencing delays as we get closer to the application date, we would like you to let us know, but I also want to tell you that there will not be much we can do to speed this up. So just make sure, as I said, that you're really jumping on this ASAP. Okay, moving into details of the competition. Excuse me, these dates are in the RFA, but just to go over them again, the RFA was released last week on Wednesday the 26th. We have these 2 recommended but not required webinars. One was Tuesday and this one right now. The last webinar that we will have is what we're calling a school connection webinar, coming up this Tuesday the 8th at 10 a.m. And I have a slide about that here in 1 or 2 slides. We'll talk about that a little more. That is also a recommended but not required webinar. The thing that is required is to submit a notice of intent to apply by Friday, February 25th. You can submit that directly to me by email. The document, the actual notice that you fill out, is both in the RFA in an appendix, and it's also a standalone document on the grant website that you can download. So just please make sure that you submit that by that deadline. I've already gotten a number of these from organizations, so thank you for those who've already sent it. We just really need this information for our own planning purposes to know how many applications we're going to receive. So please submit on time. If you don't submit that, we will not be able to accept your application, so don't overlook that. And then the application deadline in EGMS is Thursday, March 10th by 3 p.m. Please note the 3 p.m. time. That's a little bit of an unusual time. It's a little earlier in the day. So just make sure that you submit by 3 p.m. I think I have another slide about submitting early, so we'll cover that when we get to it. The anticipated award date is mid-May. I think the RFA says May 15th, and then I realized that's a Saturday. So May 16th, mid-May, is when we anticipate giving out these awards. Okay, a little bit more about the pre-application events. I think I covered bullets 1 and 2, the school connection webinar that I mentioned. This is for potential applicants to the grant, such as yourselves, who want to make a brief presentation to school leaders who might be interested in partnering with applicants. It's not required, but it's recommended. One of our, obviously, something we really want to promote with this grant, especially with the scaling grant award type, is helping you all expand your programming to more schools across the district. But we know to do that, you need to make connections with leaders of those schools to find out if they're interested in offering tutoring. So we wanted to offer a way to help with that, and that's why we're sponsoring this school connection webinar. We have explicitly invited the leaders of the 75 priority schools for this grant to attend. And then today we're sending out a notice, tomorrow in OSSE's newsletter that goes to all the school leaders, inviting all the school leaders in the district. So we've invited quite a large number of school leaders, and we will send out the webinar recording to them afterwards as well. So this is just a really good opportunity to get in front of a lot of school leaders who want to do tutoring, who are interested in bringing tutoring to their students. But please, to do this, you have one more day to sign up. So make sure that you both complete, there's a form on the website just saying, very simple, just essentially saying like, we want to present and giving me your basic information. And I also need 2 slides from you that you want to present. And there's a slide format template that we'd like you to use. And that is also on our grant website. So just make sure you download that template and complete your slides and then send them to me and as well as the form, both by tomorrow, Friday, February 4th at 5 p.m. And then I'm going to use all that information. And on Monday, organizations will get information about how to log into the webinar and kind of what the agenda is and all that stuff. But I need to know who is presenting by tomorrow to be able to do that. So again, it's not required at all to present in the webinar, but if you're interested, just make sure you submit that information to me by tomorrow. The notice of intent to apply, I think I went over that already. It is required. We won't be able to let you apply if you don't submit that. Oh, just a piece about submitting the application. The deadline will be strictly enforced. Applications submitted at or after 3:01 p.m. we will not be able to accept. We have seen this happen a number of times and just strongly encourage you to please don't wait until the last day to submit. It is very difficult if you're having technical issues with EGMS and something with your submission. It puts a lot of pressure on both you and our help desk staff to try to help you when there's only a few hours left until the application is due. So please, 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 we encourage you to submit at least the day before, if not earlier. And then that way you can be assured that if you have a technical problem, you'll be able to reach our help desk and get a resolution to your problem before that 3 p.m. deadline actually passes. So the EGMS application, some of you may be familiar with EGMS if you're a current or former OSSE grantee or if you've applied to an OSSE grant before, but we will only accept applications through EGMS. Our application questions are in the RFA, but please don't send me answers to questions by email or something like that. Please only apply through EGMS. If your organization already has an EGMS login, you would use that. If they don't, you can see from this screenshot here on the site, there's a little place down here, you click New User, and you can set up an EGMS account for your organization. So that's something you could go do later today, is you could log in and get an account set up for your organization if you haven't done that already. One of the first thing you will be asked to do is fill out what we call our central data assurances. This is just a common set of essentially boilerplate assurances that we get from all organizations who apply to all grants at OSSE, and we do it so we don't have to kind of copy and paste the same information over and over and over in every grant, and you do it just once for the year. So if you apply to other grants at OSSE, you've done this for 2022 and it's complete. So you will go in, you will open the central data assurances, you will have the right person from your organization sign off and say, yes, we agree to all these things. And then you will save and submit that, and you'll be good to go with that. You can also see what these central data assurances are in our RFA. It's all the way at the end on like page 58 or something. If you haven't created your account yet, you can see what they actually say, but you'll just want to make sure that you go in and complete that. So that's another thing you could do, as soon as you get your EGMS account, you could go complete these central data assurances. Then once you actually do that, it will let you create your application for the high impact tutoring grant. So you'll be on a dashboard and you will see a number of these blue kind of square tiles. I'm not totally sure how many tiles you'll be able to see. It kind of depends on your organization and how many grants we have open at the time. There'll be other grants you could theoretically apply for if you wanted to, but you will want to look for the tile that says high impact tutoring grant, and then you will click here on the blue text to create a sub project. It's a little, you would think it might say create an application, but create a sub project is what you want to click on, and that's what will create your application for this grant. Once your application is created, you will see all these blue tabs like pop into existence up at the top of the screen, and this is the actual application that you'll be filling out. It has all of the content that you'll need to populate in these tabs. A note at this point, if you are one of the organizations that's going to apply for 2 types of grants, the scaling and the planning and launch grant, you must submit 2 entirely separate applications in EGMS, 1 for each award type. This is because there's only one place in here, where is it, to put a budget, and we need 2 budgets for both awards that you're planning to apply for. So just make sure that you submit 1 application for one type and 1 for another type with separate budgets in each, and don't submit both your answers to both in 1 application, because you will actually, in each application, you will have answers for all 4 of the award types up here, but you will only need to fill out 1 tab for the one that you're applying for, and you will leave the other 3 blank. So that's why I just want to stress that if you're doing 2 types, please do 2 applications. If most of you are just going to be doing 1, so you don't have to worry about that, just fill out 1. Okay, section 1 or tab 1 is what you can see here, and these are just general overview pages. It's general information about the program and the competition. There's information about the review panel and information about the rubric. A lot of this, it's just the same information from the RFA and kind of for your reference. So there's nothing you need to complete on these tabs. Section 2 is your organization contact information. This is contact information for your key project staff and points of contact. There's also a place in here to enter names and emails for people who you want to be kind of CC'd on information about the anything that happens with the application. So you can put their names in there too. Sections 3, 4, 5, and 6 again are the 4 tabs where you'll put your actual answers to the questions in there. And again, you will only fill out 1 of them and you'll leave the other 3 blank, which might seem a little weird, but that's how we were able to set up this application. So you'll find the tab that has the application you're actually filling out, and you will copy and paste your answers into those fields in that tab. So the scaling application type has 11 questions, and there's also a place to attach your organization's logic model and or theory of change. This should say and or, so that's that in the RFA. So if you have both of these, attach them both. If your organization only has one or the other, attach that one. Similarly, tab 4, the planning grant, if that's the one you're applying for, you will have 13 questions to answer, and you'll attach your logic model and or theory of change. Section 5, if you're applying for strategic program support award, there are 9 questions and your logic model and theory of change attached. And then section 6, if you're applying for the program evaluation services, there are 5 questions and actually no attachments in there. Something I will say for these applications, each text field has a character limit. I believe it's 5,000 characters, which is quite a few characters. It's probably like almost at least a page of text, but I would just really be careful when you are drafting. We would recommend you draft your answers outside of EGMS and then copy and paste them in at the end to actually submit it. I would just make sure you leave yourself adequate time to test and make sure your whole answer actually fits in the field and doesn't get cut off. You have a pretty long space to answer, but I would hate, again, this is another, if you're doing it at the last minute and you don't have a lot of time and you realize your answer is too long, don't want you to spend time scrambling to cut that answer down. So just pay heed to the 5,000 character limit as you're going to make sure your answer will fit. Section 7 or tab 7 is detailed planning expenditures or your budget. This section has kind of 2 parts. So there's one tab where it's called detailed summary of planned expenditures. And this is essentially your budget narrative. And there's 5 questions that will require kind of written out narrative answers about your budget. Again, these questions, the text can all be seen in the RFA. And then as soon as you go create your application in EGMS, you can see those questions in there too. And then the budgeted line items by category, there's 5 different categories, and this is where you enter your actual proposed budget for your application. This is all just numbers. There's no explanation that you would add of these sections here, and then it will summarize it for you at the end so you can kind of see what the whole budget looks like. And again, please, there's only one budget, area to enter only one budget. So make sure, again, if you're applying for 2 grant types that you submit 2 separate applications, each with their own budget. Just kind of an aside about allowable expenses. Let me make sure. I see questions. Okay, good. I see questions continuing to come in. So thank you. Keep submitting those. And I will continue. Allowable expenses. So what can you spend your budget on for this grant? So funding will be made available to awardees on a reimbursement basis in alignment with the approved application budget. So that's one key thing to note about if you hopefully become a grantee of OSSE, we give funds to organizations by reimbursement only. So you will have to actually expend the funds first, and then after you expend the funds, you put in an invoice or a request for reimbursement. It will actually be through EEMS, and then we approve it, and then you get your funds afterward. So just make sure that you understand that that's how we operate, and that's how the funding will be coming to you if you are awarded this grant. So what is allowable on this in your budget? Costs that support projects that meet the purpose of the funding, costs that align with and support the projects described in the application, and then costs that meet the requirements of permissible use of federal funds within 2 CFR Part 200. 2 CFR Part 200 is the federal grant law. We have gotten a couple of questions already about kind of what can I essentially spend this grant on, and I'll just tell you that we will obviously answer your questions, but virtually all of the answers to those questions can be found within this 2 CFR Part 200, because it is the federal statutes about what you can do with federal money. So I just strongly encourage you all to make sure that there's at least someone, maybe a finance person in your organization or an attorney who's familiar with this 2 CFR Part 200, because you can kind of get answers to a lot of your questions about these budgetary items in there. And it's just, you can literally, if you Google 2 CFR Part 200, it's easy to be found online. What are non-allowable expenses? So unallowable costs per federal government guidelines. So that's, again, the CFR Part 200 says what all the unallowable costs are. So it is essentially too much to reiterate it all here, but we encourage you to familiarize yourself with that. Costs that don't align with the strategies outlined in the application. So essentially you said you were going to do one thing and now you're doing something else and trying to spend money on something different. So we would say, well, that's not what you said you would do, so it doesn't align. And costs that don't meet the purpose. So again, if it's outside, you got a grant for HIT, but you're trying to do mentoring, or you're trying to do something else that's not high impact tutoring, that would be a non-allowable expense. Just a couple more sections about EEMS. So section 8 is the supporting documentation. There's only a couple things that we'll be looking for here. So one is, if you're a nonprofit, your IRS 501c3 determination letter. This is required. Please remember to attach it here, because unfortunately we weren't able to engineer the system so that it doesn't, what am I trying to say? So that it wouldn't let you submit it if it's not there. Like, it will let you submit the application if this isn't attached, because we don't know if you're a nonprofit or not when you're making your application. So please, for the nonprofits, just don't forget to attach this there. There is a reminder in the system. And then this is also where you would attach any MOUs or letters of support or intent from schools indicating a planned tutoring partnership. So these aren't required, but organizations with evidence of these will receive additional preference. Page 46 of the RFA in the rubric talks about that. So if you have those letters, this is where the section where you would attach them. Any other uploads in this section, honestly, we will not read. So please don't attach anything else here except these two things. I think some things we've seen before is sometimes in some of the answers to questions, people will say like, oh, refer to our attachment, attachment A that we put in the supporting documentation. And like, we will not look at that. So make sure when you answer your questions that the full answer to the question is contained in that text that you paste in, and we don't have to kind of refer over to other documents because we will not be able to look at them. And then it is also possible that after you submit your application, we might ask for changes or amendments to it. And if we do, this doesn't happen in every case, but if we do, this is a section where you would attach those. And then finally, in addition to the central data assurances that by this point you have already done, there's a couple of program specific assurances on tab 9 that we'd ask you to agree to here. Again, these are all, you can find the text of these right now in the RFA, way down toward the end, but this tab requires you to kind of push a button saying like, yes, we agree to all these things. So make sure you don't overlook that. And then finally, there's a tab for you to submit. It will ask you to run a consistency check to make sure that you didn't forget key things. So it won't let you submit if you don't fill out the contact information and if you don't fill out the budget. But again, it doesn't know which of the 4 award types you're applying for. So unfortunately, it will let you submit the application if you like leave a question blank or if some of your answer gets cut off. So I would just really strongly encourage everyone to look over what you look over your application very, very carefully to make sure that nothing was overlooked, because it would let you submit without those things. It will the budget, the assurances, the contact information, it'll kind of flag if you forgot those ones. But your actual answers are something that it won't know if they're not complete. So make sure you do that. And then you'll submit the application to OSSE. I literally think the button says like submit to OSSE. And then to make sure that it went through, if you go back to your dashboard, you'll see right here that it says submitted for review. So that's how you'll know that it went through. If it does not, so 2 things. 1, make sure you go back and check that it says submitted for review. And then if it doesn't, that's when you might want to reach out for help. I have yes, this is the slide here. So if you have a technical problem like that with EGMS or anything else, like I cannot log in, something about the application isn't working, it didn't submit, I don't understand, please don't reach out to me. But our call center will be able to help you much faster. And I honestly will just like bounce you to our call center if it's a technical issue, because I probably don't know the answer. The fastest way is to just call them. And you can email them as well if it's less urgent, but I would urge you to call if you're having especially something with the submission of the application. And then for whoever in your organization is actually going to be submitting this, we do have a recorded training about how to use EGMS on our website. So the link's right here. This will be posted online, so you'll be able to click through there, and we're going to put this in our FAQ as well. So we would encourage whoever that person is to go through that training so they can really understand how everything works a little beyond what we're able to do today. And then the last 2 tabs, just kind of housekeeping and EGMS. You can print your application as a PDF. Actually, I think at any time during the process, but I imagine most people use this after you've submitted it. It's a little odd when you put the submission in, you have to wait until the turn of the next hour before it will create your PDF for you. I don't totally know why it does that, but you have to wait. So put in your request and then you just wait. Like right now it's 3:36, you just wait till 4, then your PDF would appear and then you go on your way. And then application history is a tab where you can view the submission and review dates and kind of who's worked on it and all that kind of stuff. So brief review of the award process. Again, this is all in the RFA, but just to go over it again, grants under this program will be awarded competitively. They will be reviewed by a panel of external reviewers who will be convened to review, score, and rank each application. The review panels will be composed of neutral, qualified, professional individuals selected for their expertise, knowledge, and/or related experiences. All external reviewers must sign a conflict of interest statement, so we'll know that they don't have a conflict of interest with anyone's application that they are actually reviewing. And the application will be scored against a rubric. So that rubric is in RFA, in Appendix B, and it's also in the EGMS application. More about the scoring rubric. I really encourage everyone to look the rubric over very carefully, because that is essentially how we're going to be, that is how we're going to be making these award decisions for who gets funding, is who has the best scores on this rubric. And I wanted to draw your attention specifically for the scaling and planning and launch grant award types. There are 13 categories in which applicants can receive up to 35 additional points on their application for meeting certain conditions. And this includes categories such as serving high need grade levels of middle or high school. We really need more organizations that tutor middle and high schoolers. Evidence of strong partnerships with schools, which I mentioned a little bit already. And specific plans to serve students with disabilities, or to serve schools where 20% or more of the students are English learners. So that's just a few of the qualifications. Really, these 13 categories, They're in there because these are areas we've identified we need more organizations working with these students. And we really encourage everyone to think about how could you bring your programming to these students who really need this programming. So just make sure you look at those categories and make sure you understand what they are and consider how you might be able to work with those students and work that into your application. And then also the planning and launch grant award type, if you're wanting to apply for that, it has 3 categories that apply just to it alone. And it's pages 49 and 50 of the RFA. Just make sure you look at that so you understand what you'll be evaluated on for that award type. The priority schools, I've mentioned these a couple times. So OSSE has identified a list of about 75 what we're calling priority schools for purposes of this grant. These schools have 70% or more of the student body designated as at risk, or they are designated as comprehensive support and improvement schools, or CSI schools, so schools that are getting special supports from OSSE to improve. And the list of these schools can be found on our HIT website. I think it's called School Data, and it's like an Excel sheet. And you can open it and find, it's actually a list of all of the K-12 schools in DC, and you can see clearly labeled which ones are priority schools. So applicants will receive additional points for partnering with these schools. This is one of those categories that I was mentioning on the previous slide. Page 47 and 48 of the RFA talks about how exactly this works. And again, these are schools that we know the student body likely has great need for high impact tutoring. And we want to encourage you all as applicants not to overlook schools in this group and to consider reaching out to make partnerships specifically with schools in this group. That's not to say that a lot of these schools already do tutoring and they already have partners, but we just want to make sure you're all aware of who these schools are and that you're thinking thoughtfully when you're thinking about expanding your partnerships, that you might consider these schools. And again, that's the purpose of the School Connection webinar on Tuesday, is to help you, support you in making those connections. Just a flag to the schools that are priority schools include Cardozo Education Campus, Elliott High Middle School, and Langley Elementary School, which are CSI schools, but they have fewer than 70% at-risk students. So they're not at that 70% threshold, but they are a priority school, and you'll be able to see them labeled as such on our school data document on our website. Let's see, okay. Continuing on, we're getting closer here. Award notification. So we'll notify all applicants via EGMS and email whether the application is selected for funding or not. It is possible that we could approve your application or grant you an award, but not award the full amount of funds that you've requested. And if this does happen and you choose to accept it, assuming you do, you would be asked to submit a revised budget for the new funding amount prior to actually receiving the funds. Each applicant will get a grant award notification, or a GAN, in EGMS upon application approval. That's kind of your official notice that you got the fund, that you got the award. Again, we hope to make these awards by May 16th. And then all funding decisions are final and are not subject to review, appeal, or protest. Okay, eligibility requirements. I know this is like what everyone's been waiting for and what I've gotten a lot of questions about so far. So who is eligible to apply for these different award types? Okay, the scaling and the planning and launch grant award types, the applicant organizations must have a primary vision and program focus on delivering student interventions that help students reach academic outcomes. So it has to be the main thing. Helping students improve academically has to be the main thing you do. It can't be just one of the things. You need a demonstrated history of success, at least 3 years in providing tutoring programming. Okay, I have a few more things to say about this aside from what's on the slide, but a couple of things. One, tutoring programming, it has to go beyond homework help or supervised study halls. So we are not considering that as experience doing tutoring for purposes of this grant. We are looking for experience with purposeful tutoring to improve kids' academic outcomes rather than like a time where they can bring whatever homework they have from their classes. Also got some questions about when is the 3-year cutoff. So applications being due in March 2022, it would be March 2019. So you have to be able to show that you have this 3 years of demonstrated success between starting in March 2019 or earlier. You also have to show that you have at least 3 years of experience serving students in the target population described in the RFA. I think it's section 1.8, either in the district or elsewhere. So, and these don't need to be, I got a question from an organization about, they have 3 years of tutoring, but not with the target population, and then 3 years with the target population and not tutoring. And it doesn't have to be from the same exact program. You just need to be able to show 3 years of experience in each area. We also got a question as to, does it have to be 3 years of experience in high impact tutoring? The answer is no, just in tutoring. We know that high impact tutoring is a bit of a new concept for many organizations. It's kind of innovative. And while we will be funding high impact tutoring programs through this grant, we know that a lot of organizations qualified to do this may not have actually been doing high impact tutoring up until now, per that slide that I showed you earlier. So we just want to see success in tutoring, but then we also want to see in your proposal that you will be doing high impact tutoring under this grant. So I hope that adds a bit, answers maybe some questions that people had. For the strategic program support award type, it's a little different. So I'll try to highlight the differences here. We are looking for an organization with a demonstrated history of success, at least 1 year, providing strategic program supports to organizations and/or schools operating high impact tutoring programs. So for this award type, we are looking for experience with high impact tutoring specifically, not just not tutoring. We're looking for high impact tutoring. So yeah, other experience with tutoring programs other than HIT will not count toward the experience for this award type. As I said before, there's kind of 5 sub areas here that we're going to need this the ultimate grantee to be able to do, and we're going to be looking for experience in all 5 of those areas. This organization needs a primary vision and program focus on reaching district students. So the organization should be focused on the district specifically. And then they also need at least 5 years of experience with the target student population in the district. So while the other 2 award types, it's okay to have that experience outside of the district, for here, we're looking for an organization who has experience working with district students specifically. And then for program evaluation services, we are looking for these 4 qualifications. So at least 1 example of evaluating high impact tutoring programming in urban settings and/or for low income students of color. So again, this is high impact tutoring specifically, not other types of tutoring. At least 3 evaluation projects of educational programs which meet the standards for evaluation research in the What Works Clearinghouse, which you can see the link there to those standards. At least 2 examples of conducting qualitative and quantitative analysis of student educational outcomes, and at least 2 examples of conducting interviews and surveys, designing surveys to assess the effectiveness of multiple educational programs and interventions. A couple more pieces, and then we're almost to our Q&A. Program requirements. Okay, this grant has quite a few program requirements, as I'm sure you all have seen in the RFA. We essentially don't have time in this webinar to go over what they all are. So I think I just want to reiterate that you should read sections 1.5 through 1.9 very, very carefully to ensure that your programs, the program you are proposing, that the model qualifies for funding under this grant. And we also just wanted to stress that the model itself has to align with this sections 1.5 through 1.9. And if it doesn't, you will not receive funding, even if you as an organization are otherwise eligible. So we're really looking for eligibility in 2 areas. We're looking that your organization's eligible and that your actual program that you're proposing to fund meets all of these qualifications. So the program model requirements include, there's requirements for key personnel who will be leading it, and that's in section 1.5. There's requirements about the size and location in section 1.6. There's requirements about the content and model, which is in section 1.7. There's evidence requirements, which is in section 1.9. And then there's the target student population requirements in section 1.8. And we wanted to pull a piece out here specifically because it's a little bit buried in the RFA, but it's really important. So applicants must propose to work with schools in which at least 50% of students are at risk. So the list of schools, of all district schools and their percentages of at-risk students are in that same data file, Excel file on our website that you can find that I mentioned earlier that also lists the priority schools. For non-school sites, so if you're an organization that offers tutoring in the community that's not at an actual school, the applicants should outline a clear plan to recruit and enroll students who attend schools in which at least 50% of students are at risk. Please do not request funding for partnerships with schools with fewer than 50% of students at risk as part of this grant. If you include them, it could put at risk your ability to get funding under this grant. And this whole requirement about the 50% of students at risk, it flows from the federal funding source of this money. The funds we are using for this grant come from the American Rescue Plan, which was signed into law last year, as I'm sure you're all very well aware. These funds have a specific purpose to help people who've been impacted by the pandemic. And this kind of 50% requirement is part of that. So that is why it's there. It is a federal requirement. We cannot change this requirement. So just make sure you're being really thoughtful about the schools you are proposing partnerships with, and or if you're a non-school, if you're doing non-school sites, the way you'll recruit those students to make sure that it meets the qualifications for this funding. Q&A, okay, we're finally there. I was a little faster today than Tuesday. Just 3 questions that I can answer directly. We've gotten a couple times before I turn to the verbal Q&A. Can this grant be used to fund homework help programming? No, it is for high impact tutoring programming, not homework help. Section 1.4 of the RFA talks about this. And again, like I said before, just make sure you review our standards and that you review those sections 1.5 through 9 of the RFA to understand if you qualify. I hope you can all still hear me. It's saying I have degraded audio quality. Can anyone put like a yes if you can still hear me, or somehow indicate if you think it's the quality is bad? Okay, I've seen people say yes, so I hope it's not still a problem. Okay, great, thank you. Quickly, 2 more. Can this grant be used to fund programming other than tutoring, such as a mentoring program, a teen leadership program? The answer is no. So I know a lot of your organizations do other, I'm sure, very valuable programming other than tutoring. That is fine, but please, in your application and budget proposals, make sure it is only for the high impact tutoring portion of what you do. So don't include other non-high impact tutoring programming in your application. This one also a few times. Can this grant be used to fund virtual only tutoring programming? So no, there is some nuance to this though. At least okay, with this grant, we really want to encourage in-person tutoring programming. So we're asking that proposals include at least 51% of funded programming take place in person with the tutor and student at the same location. But you can propose up to 49% of the funded programming be virtual tutoring. I think though there are a couple organizations out there where all you do is virtual tutoring, and at this time those programs are not eligible because that would be 100% virtual tutoring. And again, we are looking to primarily fund in-person tutoring. Okay, so that was all of the prepared information that I had. I see we have quite a few questions in the question section, but I think we will first go to the verbal questions, any verbal questions that people have. So at this time, if you could hit the little hand button to put your hand up if you have a verbal question, and I will go through a couple of those. And I think I'm going to go through just alphabetical order, and it's by first name. So the first person I see is Christopher Anuzis. I think you can unmute yourself to ask your question. Or I really hope you can. Oh, you are muted by an organizer. Okay, hold on.
Hey,
okay, Christopher, can you speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent,
Yes.
thank you. I had a question about the 3-year eligibility. That makes sense for the scaling grant, but can you talk about that for the planning and launch grant? Did that
Yes.
tie to that? Yes, thank you.
Yes. For the planning and launch grant, we are still looking to fund organizations that have at least 3 years of tutoring experience. So essentially, we are looking to fund established tutoring organizations, but it'll be for that one, organizations that maybe your experience is outside of DC and you're looking to come in to DC for the first time. So that's who would be eligible for that award type.
Gotcha, thank you for the clarification.
Sure, of course. And then, okay, I'm going down, I'm looking for another hand. Okay, I see a hand. Okay, I see Ron, your hand's raised. Okay, I think I have to unmute you. Okay, Ron, I think you need to unmute yourself now, and then we can hear you. I'm a little inexperienced with GoToWebinar, and the way it unmutes people is a little strange. Ron, are you there? We have to come back to Ron. Okay, we'll come back to Ron in a second. I see Tony Zolikoffer. Tony, I think it says you're self-muted.
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi. Yeah, so my question is, if I have a nonprofit arm that primary goal is to provide education, tutoring, meets the criteria, but the tutoring that I would use is the tutoring from my for-profit part of that. So the hit would be the model and from the for-profit arm. Am I eligible to apply under the nonprofit and still use the for-profit model for this grant to be eligible for the grant?
Mm-hmm. No, thanks for that, Tony. I think we've gotten actually a couple of questions that are somewhat similar to that. So I want to say we'll answer your question in our FAQ that's coming out next week, because I want to make sure we get you the right answer. But I will say that we will be looking for if this makes sense, the organization that is applying for the grant should itself be eligible for the grant. So it should be able to meet the 3 years of experience, should be able to show that it's worked with the student population. I think it's a little bit of less concern exactly where the materials are coming from, which I think is kind of what you're asking, but the organization should have been successfully providing tutoring for at least 3 years and working with that student population for at least 3 years.
Thank you.
And I think you might have submitted your question in writing too. So if any questions anyone has submitted in writing will also appear in the FAQ. So just make sure to look out for it there too.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And then let me see. Okay, Ron. Okay, Ron, you're unmuted now. So hopefully we can hear you now.
Yes. My question
yes, I can hear you.
Great. Yes, my question is around getting at-risk students interested in attending mixed classes. I found in the past that if they had not, if they're not receiving a grade or some form of credit for attending, they kind of lose their focus. So can that be added to the program if it's not already?
Yes, and I think Ron, you're another one where I think you've submitted that in writing, and we want to respond to you in the FAQ. So
Okay.
make sure you check in there when we release it next week. But I will say, I think we want to discourage giving letter grades for high impact tutoring, because it's not supposed to be it's supposed to be kind of a support service for the students rather than kind of like a course that they're getting a grade in. But there are potentially other ways that you can engage students in this programming, for example, other types of incentives or celebrations that you could have to keep students engaged. So I think we'll be likely giving some advice like that in our FAQ, but just make sure you check the FAQ when it comes out next week to see like a fuller answer for you.
Right. I want to propose then maybe if one would like some type of credit that the student can use towards a grade, another grade later on, like a class that might be failing. If they attended these, 20 classes, and maybe we can give them some points that goes towards another subject matter.
We'll put in a response for you, Ron, in the FAQ, and so that everybody can kind of see what our guidance is in there.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, I see Tony, your hand is up, but I think it might just be from your previous question. I see we have quite a few questions in the, okay, I'm apologizing to everyone in advance. The questions appear in this very narrow window that I can't read them fully, and I don't know why I can't make the window larger. But I will spend a few minutes here seeing if I can go through and answer the questions that I am able to.
Charlotte, I'm happy to help and read some aloud.
Oh, can you see them? Yes, please, can you, Sarah? Because I don't know why it's like this. I can't read them.
Yes, so starting at the top, and I think a couple of these we've already covered, but can you please explain the elements of reimbursement cost?
Yes, so I think if you need more information than this, I would suggest you email me a written question. But essentially, OSSE, all of our grants operate only on a reimbursement basis. So you have to expend the costs, and then you have to submit essentially like an invoice to us detailing costs that you spent. I think many organizations typically do it on like a monthly basis, and then we reimburse you after that. So when you're thinking about financial planning for this grant, just know that that's how we operate. And so you'll have to have cash on hand just to spend on the costs, and then wait a little bit down the line to get reimbursed from OSSE.
How much down the line?
Okay, next question. What means are available for vetting tutors?
What means are available? Well, we're going to be looking for you to explain clearly in your application, in your proposal, how you plan to vet tutors to make sure that they are highly qualified. And I think there's a section, I don't recall offhand what section of RFA it is, but there is literally a section that says tutors, and it talks about the kind of who can be a tutor and like what we'll be looking for there.
Can a vendor offer schools multiple selections of programs?
I think this kind of goes back to, I know that a lot of your organizations do multiple things, and maybe tutoring isn't the only thing that you do. The only thing we're going to fund through this grant is high impact tutoring. So I think you should keep that in mind when you're thinking about making partnerships with schools. I think if there's other things that school leaders are interested in that you do, like obviously we certainly, aren't going to be in the way of your partnership with that school, but you should understand and make it clear to the school leaders as well that the funding that you might be getting from us would only be for high impact tutoring.
Is the maximum award amount per year or per grant period?
It's for the grant period, so the whole either 28 months or 12 months if it's the planning and launch grant. So we'll want your budget proposal to take that into account and span that entire grant period.
Will special eligibility be given to CBEs?
No, there are no preferences in the rubric for CBEs. And I think what people don't know, that's certified business enterprises, which is a designation that businesses can have with DC government.
And I know we're over time. Charlotte, should we keep going with a few more questions, or I don't think we're going to get through all of them? What makes sense?
I could do a couple more, Sarah, especially if you see ones that you feel like we have not answered. Do like a handful more.
Okay. Let's see. If we have a for-profit and nonprofit, can we apply for both entities?
Oh, this one I'll probably want to have answered in our FAQ, but I mean, they're different organizations. So it seems to me if they're truly separate organizations, they would be applying separately for these grants. But I will make sure that we get that one answered in our FAQ as well.
Can the program be blended, virtual and face-to-face?
Yes, it can, but again, you'll want to make sure that it's still meeting that 51% requirement where the majority of the program is taking place in person. And I think the way we imagine that playing out is like we know a lot of organizations have some kids doing in-person tutoring and some doing virtual. And so we just want you to propose, a mix of those, a mix of what you're doing as part of this project, with the majority of it being in-person tutoring. I don't know that I've heard from organizations that are having the same student, like sometimes be in person and sometimes virtual. Maybe that is the case for some of you, but again, we'd still be looking for it to be to fund a majority of in-person tutoring.
Could this funding be used in conjunction with 21st century funds, or do students need to be unduplicated? For example, if we have a community-based 21st century program, could we use these funds to bring in a qualified tutor to provide a higher quality program? This would be in addition to using funds to start tutoring programs in schools.
I think this is addressed in so this is part of federal grant law. You can't use federal grant money for anything that you're essentially already using federal grant money for. So I think most people can understand, essentially you cannot bill the government twice for the same thing. But it sounds like what this person is saying is it would be on top of like the tutoring here would potentially be a new thing that you're doing. It's not something that is existing. I think we'll definitely want to answer this one in the FAQ. I think the concern here would be a little bit more about the programming model that you have, and is it holistic, is it thoughtful, and how does it align with what you're already doing rather than being just kind of an add-on. So I think we're looking to fund very thoughtful programming that really aligns to what HIT is, like on the slide that we showed earlier, rather than something that's kind of like on the side of what's already happening. So I think that that's what we would want to see in the proposal.
And then I think last question, we've covered the bulk of them at this point. If you propose serving students at a school that has 49% of students at risk, is that allowed?
No, it has to be 50 or more. And so we do that data sheet on our site. It's sorted in order of all the schools and their percentages, like from up to almost 100 down to almost 0. And so just make sure that the schools you're proposing to partner with are 50 or more. If it's 49 or less, we won't be able to fund it.
And Charlotte, that's the bulk of the questions we have covered now.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Well, hopefully everyone got their question answered. If not, we do have a log of all the questions that were typed in, and we will be and regardless of whether I answer them verbally or not, we're going to include them all in the FAQ as well. So just make sure you keep your eye peeled on our site next week for that FAQ to come out to get your questions answered. And I think that's all we had today. So thank you everyone for participating. We really appreciate your interest in the grant, and we're very excited about it. So thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.